materialism, and immorality. As is known, the United Nations was founded by 3 or 4 countries against Germany at the time. The United Nations was formed by the nations that joined together against Germany in the Second World War. Those countries formed a body called the Security Council, made its own countries permanent members, and granted them the power of veto. We were not present at that time. The United Nations was shaped in line with those 3 countries and wanted us to step into the shoes originally designed against Germany. That is the real substance of the United Nations when it was founded over 60 years ago. That happened in the absence of some 165 countries, at a ratio of 1 to 8. That is, 1 was present and 8 were absent. They created the Charter, of which I have a copy. If one reads the Charter of the United Nations, one finds that the preamble of the Charter differs from its articles. How did it come into existence? All those who attended the San Francisco conference in 1945 participated in creating the preamble, but they left the articles and internal rules of the procedures of the so-called Security Council to experts, specialists, and interested countries, which were those countries that had established the Security Council and united against Germany. The preamble is very appealing and no one objects to it, but all the provisions that follow it completely contradict the preamble. We reject such provisions and we will never uphold them. They ended with the Second World War. The preamble says that all nations, small or large, are equal. Are we equal when it comes to the permanent seats? No, we're not equal. The preamble states in writing that all nations are equal whether they are small or large. Do we have the right to veto? Are we equal? The preamble says that we have equal rights whether we are large or small. That is what is stated and what we agreed in the preamble. So the veto contradicts the Charter. The permanent seats contradict the Charter. We neither accept nor recognize the veto. The preamble of the Charter states that armed force shall not be used save in the common interest. That is the preamble that we agreed to and signed, and we joined the United Nations because we wanted the Charter to reflect that. It says that armed force shall only be used in the common interest of all nations. But what has happened since then? 65 wars have broken out since the establishment of the United Nations and the Security Council. 65 since their creation, with the millions more victims than the Second World War. Are those wars and the aggression and force that were used in those 65 wars in the common interest of us all? No. They were in the interest of 1 or 3 or 4 countries, but not of all nations. We will talk about whether those wars were in the interests of one country or of all nations. That flagrantly contradicts the Charter of the United Nations that we signed, and unless we act in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations to which we all agreed, we will reject it and not be afraid not to speak diplomatically to anyone. Now we are talking about the future of the United Nations. There should be no hypocrisy or diplomacy. Because it concerns the important and vital issue of the future of the world. It was hypocrisy that brought about 65 wars since the establishment of the United Nations. The preamble also states that if armed forces is used, it must be a United Nations force. Thus military intervention by the United Nations with the joint agreement of the United Nations, not one or two or three countries using armed force. The entire United Nations will decide to go to war to maintain international peace and security. Since the establishment of the United Nations in 1945, if there's an act of aggression by one country against another, the entire United Nations should deter and stop that act. If a country, Libya for instance, were to exhibit aggression against France, then the entire organization would respond because France is a sovereign state, member of the United Nations.